I have a question for you that I'd like to start off with. I wonder how many of you enjoy putting puzzles together. You know, the kind of jigsaw puzzles is what I mean. Myself, I can't say that I'm one that enjoys it because let's face it, if you're going to put a puzzle together, you're signing up for a big time investment. Am I right? Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about children's puzzles. When my kids were little, I could do their puzzles all day long, and I was awesome at them. Why? Because there were only 16 pieces in the puzzle. Sure, I could do those puzzles, no problem. But if you ask me, hey, do you want to put this 500-piece puzzle together? Most of the time, my answer will be, no, thank you. Why? Yes, it's the time commitment, okay? But you can't do that activity quickly. And let me clarify something else about puzzles. It's not just the time commitment that makes me averse to putting these jigsaw puzzles together. I've told you all before that, as a matter of fact, right as a few of us were signing on right before the 10 o'clock hour, I was giving a little progress report on some of the stuff we're doing around the house, because I'm a big do-it-yourselfer. I love doing projects around the house, though my muscles right now disagree with me. But I love doing home improvement projects, and some of those projects have gone on for weeks upon weeks, much to the delight of my wife. So it's not just the time commitment of putting a puzzle together that I don't care for, but it's the time commitment combined with the uncertainty of a puzzle. What do I mean by that? You see, with a home improvement project, generally speaking, I always have a good idea of what my next step is. With a puzzle, not so much, not always. This is what gives me anxiety about puzzles. You scatter all the pieces all over the table, and then what? See, where do you begin? Where in the world do you begin? Okay, yes, you can find the corner pieces. That's 4 pieces. You have 496 to go. So which one is next? Well, then you try and start building the edges, right? And if you can separate all the edge pieces out and get all those together, now you're making some progress. But after that, this is where the puzzle loses me. It's a lot of picking up pieces and holding them up one at a time and searching for the right spot where they might be able to go. Where does this one go? Well, not there, right? Let me put it with all the other mostly brown pieces in a pile over there, right? And this goes on for a long time. So you see, with putting puzzles together, there's so much uncertainty, so much feeling directionless. However, if you've ever gone through the paces, the tedious paces of putting together a puzzle, a jigsaw puzzle, you'll eventually reach a point where you turn a corner, where you can step back and say, okay, I think I'm seeing it. I think it's starting to come together now. I'm almost done. And the closer you get to being done, the more the picture starts to come together and the more you want to finish it, okay? And then when you finish it, what's the feeling you get? If you've ever put together a big puzzle that's taken forever, when you do finish, you get this tremendous sense of pride, don't you? Look what I did. I did it. And maybe this is a stretch, but I don't know anyone who's gone through the tedious paces of putting together a big, like 500-piece puzzle, and then ended up putting that last piece in and immediately responded with, well, that was a huge waste of time. You know, usually people don't say that. There's usually a moment where you step back and look at the whole picture and you appreciate it, okay? Now, here's where I'm going with this. In a sense, the crucifixion represents the completion of a puzzle. If you're one of the disciples leading up to the crucifixion, what you have left is that moment where all the puzzle pieces are scattered and dumped all over the table, and you're left to think, what am I to do with all this? Okay, think about where we were last week. Last week in the events leading up to the arrest of Jesus. If you're a disciple, you're thinking, this is it. Okay, this is the moment where the Messiah ascends to his rightful place and we're delivered. We're delivered from, but instead what happened? Jesus was arrested without a fight. In fact, he told him specifically not to fight. Put away your swords, boys. Now what do we do? Now what do we do? I thought this was the big moment. Now what do we do? And then over the next 24 hours, what happens? The disciples scatter like those puzzle pieces on the table, right? Think about Peter, the guy who drew his sword first. He was the guy who came out swinging, right? He went from that to, hey, you're with Jesus, aren't you? No, that's not me. Not me. You must have me mistaken for someone else. He denied Jesus 3 times. And then what happens? Little did the disciples know, but there are pieces to the puzzle that are being pulled off the table, held up to the light, and then placed exactly in the right, perfect, fitting spot. And again, as frustrating as puzzles may be, do you know what's good about puzzles? This is one of the good things about puzzles. Do you know what keeps people who love puzzles, the desire to keep going? You know what gives them a desire to keep going? That feeling of finding a piece of the puzzle that fits exactly in the right spot. You know, sometimes you find a piece and you try and work it in. It looks like it's supposed to fit, but it doesn't. You try and fit it, and then tries. You realize, oh, it doesn't go there. But then you find one that fits, and it just snaps into place. You find that piece and sink it right in the spot that it was designed to go. And you get this little sense of euphoria, don't you? Yes, that's it. It's like a little reward. And in a 500-piece puzzle, there are 499 little rewards along the way. And so today, we're going to look at only 3 verses of the crucifixion account. We're only going to look at 3 verses, just 3 verses. But in those 3 verses, we're going to see how those verses snap together and see how they fit exactly right, how they fall into place. And it just makes you say, yes, that's it. I mentioned to you in an email yesterday that when you start piling up all these pieces that just snap into place like this, to me, I just can't get over how people don't believe this. And again, I know there are so many more other factors going on, and it's the Holy Spirit himself that has to open your eyes and ears to be able to hear him. But then once you can see it and hear the gospel and understand, you see how these pieces just fit together. You're like, oh my word, this is a miracle, nothing short of miraculous. Okay, so the first place I want to start is going back up to where we were last week. Remember, we mentioned this verse when Jesus was arrested. The disciples thought this was their moment of truth. Instead, he told them to settle down and put away their swords. You know what? Why in the world is he doing this? And here we find one of those puzzle pieces fitting nice and tight into its space, where we read. This is Isaiah 53:7. And it says this. Where does it go? Here we go. Change this around on me. Isaiah 53:7. Remember this verse. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that before its shears is silent. So he opened not his mouth. Look how this fits into the big picture. And I want you to appreciate this too. I want you to appreciate how long before, how many years, hundreds of years, when Isaiah wrote that down, when Isaiah said that, and how much later the crucifixion of Christ was. Okay? Appreciate that. Hundreds of years before he was born, Isaiah said, like a lamb that is led to the slaughter. You see, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, Isaiah said when the Christ would go to his death, he wouldn't be driven, he wouldn't be forced, they wouldn't drag him to the slaughter. He told us he would be led and would not open his mouth. Did Jesus open his mouth? Yes, of course he said something, but he didn't speak in protest. He didn't resist arrest. Isaiah painted for us such a clear picture. I'm telling you, if you read through Isaiah 53, it's almost like you're reading a detailed live witness account of the crucifixion. I don't know how many of you know anything about slaughtering animals. I know nothing. This is a metaphor that might be lost on us today, because I don't know how many of us have gone through the details of slaughtering an animal. But imagine the difference in moving cattle to the slaughter and moving a lamb to the slaughter. One is going to be a bit more passive than the other. And as Jesus was arrested, he opened not his mouth in protest, and he even stood before those who sought to kill him. He didn't resist. He didn't resist, just like Isaiah told us hundreds of years before. Now, once they arrested Jesus, they brought him before the Jewish high priest. And make no mistake about it, the Jewish leaders wanted Jesus dead. We talked a little bit about that last week. They wanted to kill him. And basically the charge they wanted to put before Jesus was blasphemy. If you would have asked the high priest back then, why do you want to kill Jesus? What's the charge? They would have likely told you blasphemy, something along those lines. After all, in no uncertain terms, he claimed to be God. But here's the thing. The Jews under Roman rule, and what that means is, yes, they can practice the religion that they want to practice. Okay, they're under Roman rule, but still the Romans were like, please, go ahead, practice your religion, do all the things you want to do, with a few notable exceptions. If you, for example, wanted to execute somebody, you couldn't. Okay, capital punishment needed to be conducted by the Roman government. So after the high priest questions Jesus, they haul him over to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. What's the charge? Pilate says. Now, my kids have a little game they like to play with us. And by game, I mean manipulation. Okay. There was once an instance not too long ago I think we're on vacation and we were at the beach and we were near one of these, souvenir shops. And my son, Jack, comes up to me and says, "Hey, can I get this?" And what is he's asking me to buy? It's a lighter, a device that makes fire. And now it's not just any lighter, but it's kind of this mini, like a mini blowtorch. He snaps it and out comes a little flame. And I'm sure, like more than just a regular Bic lighter, but like a blowtorch, okay? Like a miniature blowtorch. And I'm sure I asked him, why in the world would you need that? Now, I can't for the life of me remember what the reason he gave me was, but I'm certain it wasn't a good reason. He may have even said, I'm almost positive he said, "I'll use my own money to buy it." Okay, now here's where I think I misstepped. I probably should have just said, "No, go put it back." But instead, I think I was thrown off by the whole "I'll use my own money" comment, because and when we're on vacation, my wife usually holds their wallets for them in her purse. So she's holding their money, okay? So I just said, "I don't know, go ask your mother." Okay, because she's holding the money. Again, I should have just said no. And so what did Jack do? He went over to his mom and said, "Can I have this?" To which she responded, "What did your dad say?" And then he said, "Oh, he said it's fine as long as you're fine with it," which is not exactly what I said, right? It was a little bit of a fast one. You see, he bent the rules a bit because neither one of us wanted to just say, "No, just go put it back. You don't need it." My son right now is the proud owner of a little miniature torch. But again, this is a little bit what the Jews are doing here with Pilate. "Pilate, will you please execute Jesus?" Why? What's the charge? I don't know. Go ask your high priest. Now, go ask the high priest. And he was hauled back and forth between the high priest and between the Roman officials. Pilate leading the charge, okay? "Will you please execute Jesus?" "No, not me," okay? But never, he still asks the crowd what the charge is. Pilate still says, "Well, I'm based on what charge?" Now, here's the tricky thing. If they say, "Well, Jesus committed blasphemy," the Roman government will say, "Who cares, right? Let him go." So they can't say that. They have to cook up something else. So they come up with something along the lines of, he's an insurrectionist. Okay, that's the root of where they're going here. You see, Pilate asked him directly, "Are you a king? Are you a king?" And here's how Jesus answered. And this is John 18:36 and following. John 18:36, which reads like this. Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world." So again, he's asking, are you a king? My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I might not be delivered over to the Jews. Okay, it would have been appropriate at this point for Peter to fight. But he's saying, my kingdom's not of this world. But my kingdom is not from this world. Then Pilate said to him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." Now listen, Jesus doesn't make any denials here, okay? He is the King of Kings, and he affirms what is absolutely true. Yes, he is a king, and that's why he's here. But he says, my kingdom is not from the world. If it was, we'd be resisting. My kingdom is not from the world. So you see, what he's saying here when he says my kingdom is not from the world, do you know what he's saying? A flyby interpretation might say, oh, he's talking about heaven, not from the world, like earth. But wait a minute. Isn't Jesus king over everything on heaven and earth? Yes, he absolutely he is. Always was, always is. But what he's specifically saying is, my kingdom does not have worldly motivation. The origin of my kingdom, the central power of my kingdom, is not the kind that you're thinking about, Pilate. My authority, my domain, doesn't come from man. It comes from an origin with which you are utterly unfamiliar. You see, that's what Jesus is saying. But what is Pilate here? He probably thinks Jesus is crazy. Okay, not of this world. What do you mean? And he tells the crowd, I find no fault in him. Now, I don't want you to miss this. Watch how this puzzle piece fits into place so perfectly. Pilate tells the people, I don't find any guilt in him. I say we let him go, but the people object. No, crucify him. There's more back and forth, and Pilate agrees to beat him and humiliate him, but still stops short of sentencing him to death. And then, John 19:4 and following, Pilate says this, John 19:4 and following. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pilate said to them, listen what he says here, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." You see what Pilate is saying here? He's saying, probably a little bit sarcastically, you crucify him. You do it yourselves. So if you're part of the Jewish crowd that wants to have him crucified, maybe you're thinking, great, there we go. He said we can do this. Let's haul him away and get this over and done with. And so what if they did? What if they did? What if they said, okay, thanks, Pilate, we got it from here? You know, why didn't they just haul him away right then and there? Because again, as convenient as that would be, the Jews know, according to Roman law, they can't carry out an execution. And you know what? Pilate knows this too. That's why I think he's being sarcastic. Do it yourselves. No, we can't. You have to do it, Pilate. But you know what's really interesting here is they know they can't do it. They know they can't do it. Pilate knows they can't do it. But why can't they really do it? Because that would have been taking a piece of the puzzle that looks like it's supposed to fit, and you line it up and you lean into it with your thumb and just try and jam it down there, but guess what? It's not the right piece. Who's in control here, right? You see, if the Jews took him away right then and there to be killed at that moment, do you know what they would have done? They wouldn't have crucified him. They would have probably stoned him. That was the Jewish form of execution, not crucifixion, you know, all the way dating back to the early law of Moses. The Jews had no means of executing someone by way of crucifixion. That was a Roman form of execution, and it had to be a Roman form of execution. Why? I'll show you in a minute. But the funny thing is that they're building a puzzle and they have no idea they're putting it together. They finally convince Pilate, hey, he's saying he's the Son of God. He's claiming to be a king. We have no king but Caesar. So they're throwing the Roman title back in at Pilate. And if you let him go, you're no friend to Caesar, Pilate. What will Caesar think about you for letting a guy like this, who's clearly claiming to have authority over Caesar? So here's the next piece of the puzzle and how it fits. We're about to take a piece, line it up, and press it in with our thumb and get that sensation of, wow, fits perfectly, okay? Let's listen to this. This is the next verse here, verse 16. So these are the next three verses here that we want to really focus in on, these next three verses. So he delivered him over to them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Now, it says that he was bearing his own cross here, okay? That phrase right there, bearing his own cross, that's the sound of a puzzle piece snapping into its place. They would put the cross on Jesus, and he would take that great weight upon his shoulders, and he would walk it up to Calvary. He climbed the hill, carrying the very wood on which he would be sacrificed. Now, does that ring any bells for you? In Genesis chapter 22, there's a man who we, as we say, is a type of Christ, an Old Testament type. This is what's known as typology, the foreshadowing of Christ in the Old Testament as a means of prophecy, okay? This person who was typed in the form of Christ was named Isaac. Remember Abraham and Isaac? He was a picture of Christ as Isaac was to be given as a sacrifice. Remember, God told Abraham, go sacrifice your son. Again, when you hear that sacrifice your son, that again is just a foreshadowing, a whisper of what would happen in the New Testament. Okay, because Christ was the son sacrificed. So notice this. This is Genesis 22:6. Genesis 22:6, going all the way back to near the beginning. Genesis 22:6 says, excuse me, this, that's from last week. Here we go, 22:6. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they both went, both of them together. Now notice what it says here. It See, I read that verse for years thinking that Abraham piled a bunch of wood on top of Isaac and was getting ready to strike a match or something. No. You see, if it was an animal sacrifice, it would have to be put to the knife first, then burned. So it doesn't make any sense that his dad would bury him beneath a bunch of wood. So when it says that Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac, then what does it say at the end of the verse here? What does it say? So they went, both of them, together. He's not burying Isaac underneath the wood. Isaac is carrying the wood. He laid the wood on Isaac like he would have done with a mule or a goat, and they all together went up the hill. That is a glimpse of Christ centuries before Jesus was born. If I said a man carrying the very wood of his sacrifice, journeying up the hill, you wouldn't know if I was talking about Isaac or Jesus. Now, that's some divine inspiration, people. The fact that Jesus carried his own cross was a piece of the puzzle snapping into place. Let's look at verse 17 again. Verse 17 says this. Here we go. And he went out, bearing his own cross to the place called the place of a skull. And he went out, okay? It says he went out. What does that mean? He went out. Went out of where? You know? Went out of Jerusalem. He went out of the city. The Romans had a law. And see, if the Jews were exercising this execution, it doesn't happen outside the city. It happens right there on the spot. But the Romans, according to their law, no one can be crucified within the city limits or within the boundaries of the city. We read in the Gospels that numerous times the Jews had tried to stone Jesus inside the city, okay? But it didn't happen. Why? Well, for one, it wasn't his time. But also, let me read for you Exodus 29:14. This is in the Old Testament, where it's describing the process surrounding a sin offering. Again, almost near the beginning, Exodus 29:14. But the flesh of the bull and its skin and its dung you shall burn with fire outside the camp. It is a sin offering. You shall burn it where? Outside the camp. Why? What is it? It is a sin offering. Where was Jesus crucified? Outside the city gates. Why? What was he? Jesus was a sin offering. Did you hear that? That was a noise. That was the sound of another puzzle piece snapping into place. Let me show you, I should have left the screen up. Let me show you Hebrews 13, 11 to 12, which says, for the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the holy places by the high priest as a sacrifice for sin are burned outside the camp. So Jesus also suffered outside the gate in order to sanctify the people through his own blood. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the author of Hebrews. You see how amazing this is? You see how amazing this is? You see what I mean by the puzzle pieces snapping into place? Again, if you're a disciple, as many times as Jesus tried to explain it to them when he walked and talked with them daily, they didn't see it yet. To them, it was still only a bunch of puzzle pieces spread out all over the table. They were thinking Messiah, military conqueror. Wrong puzzle. And now, much to their shock, it's playing out differently. Instead, we're following the playbook that was established all the way back in the Old Testament. These things have to happen, and they're happening the way God said that they would happen. You know, this is why I marvel at the Bible. I can't get over this. And it only convinces me all the more. There is no way this can be made by man. There's absolutely no way. You know, anyone who believes that the Bible is just a bunch of collection of man-made myths, there's no way. There's no way this could have been planned out this way and worked itself out by the design of man over the course of centuries. No group of people could have planned this out and had all the pieces of the puzzle fit together so perfectly. And again, these two pieces of the puzzle don't fit into place unless Rome carries out the execution, not the Jews. How are you going to plan that centuries before and make sure that it happens like that? Isaiah was telling us, Abraham and Isaac were telling us about this. How do you plan that out? There's no way you can plan that out, okay? Back when I was younger in my school days, and I think this is true from grade school to middle school and into high school, I think I had the impression or the idea that the worst job in the world had to be that of a substitute teacher. Okay, why did I say that? And I'm sorry if I don't know if that's still the case. That was the case when I was a kid. And if any of you are substitute teachers, maybe it's different now. But I don't know if it's still the same. But I remember as a child thinking, oh man, poor guy or poor girl, because my classmates were merciless to the substitute teacher. The shenanigans that they would try and pull off that my classmates would, and of course I never participated in such things. That's not true. And generally, they would always get away with it. They would always get away with it while the substitute teacher was trying to hold everything together. All kinds of chaos was persisting. And I remember kids would trade names, do things like trade names. Hey, today you'll be Johnny, I'll be Danny. So when the teacher called the roll, as she called out Johnny's name, Danny would answer here, right? And they'd go the whole day being the other person. And guess what? The teacher would have no idea, no way to verify in the moment. What could they do? I remember they would convince the teacher, oh, chapter 5? Yeah, we've already read that. We did this yesterday. Not true, okay? And the teacher would believe them. And again, as a child, I realized this is awful. Why would anyone want to do this job? It's brutal. It's brutal to be the substitute. And it's a really thankless job to be the substitute, at least the ones that I remember, okay? We're told in verse 18 of John 19, it says this. John 19:18. They were crucified. There they crucified him, and he was with him, 2 others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Okay? Keep this image of a substitute in your mind, okay? Because we're trying to ask ourselves, what is Jesus doing between 2 thieves here? That just could be another detail, right? That could just be another detail that we blow right by if we read it and not appreciate what's happening here, okay? So think about that. Why is Jesus between 2 thieves? Is there a reason for that? While I have the chat up here, look, here's a comment from Luke that says, such an amazing picture of Paul's testimony that the mystery of God has been revealed. What mystery? How could a sinful people possibly be redeemed to a holy God in a perfectly holy Christ who has been showing us the mystery of salvation from the beginning? That's what I marvel at. And here's another little detail here. This has been told to us from the very beginning. Even why is Jesus between 2 thieves? Why is he between 2 thieves? Well, because that's how you execute criminals. All right. Again, if you're reading this, you might just blow right by it, and you can make a note of what's happening, but you have to stop and understand what it means. So Jesus wasn't alone when he was crucified. We're told there were 2 others, one on either side. It's an interesting detail that John includes here, but again, why did he include it? In the Gospels, there's almost, I can't think of any detail that's in there for no reason. He included because it's another piece of the puzzle that snaps into place when it happens. Again, we just read from the 53rd chapter of Isaiah earlier when we talked about the sheep being led to the slaughter. Well, that chapter tells us of what Isaiah describes to be the suffering servant, which as you and I now know to be a description of Jesus Christ. And in Isaiah 53:9, we are told that this suffering servant, again, hundreds of years before Jesus, made his grave with the wicked. And then a little further down in verse 12, he was numbered with the transgressors, yet he bore the sin of many. Do you see how that piece of the puzzle snaps into place at the crucifixion? Why does John tell us that detail that he's crucified between 2 thieves? Because he made his grave with the wicked, and he was numbered with the transgressors. Do you see what that means? It means the perfect, sinless one, the one of total moral purity, became a substitute. The ultimate thankless job, the ultimate substitute, the perfect one who was made to be the substitute of, was put in place of reckless, wicked sinners, thieves, and transgressors. He became the substitute. And once again, this doesn't work if Jesus is executed by the Jews. But it had to go this way. It had to go this way, and one more piece of the puzzle pops into place. You see, that this whole manner of death, the crucifixion, yes, it was brutal. And this morning in the sermon, Scott talked about, he makes a distinction between pretty dead and ugly dead. Okay, pretty dead is he spoke about his laying his mother to rest very recently, and how his mother was made up in her own clothes and her makeup and her perfume as an honor to her life. But guess what? Still dead. When you compare it to, say, the crucifixion, that's pretty dead and ugly dead. Crucifixion is ugly dead. It's brutal. It was horrid. It was gruesome. It was tortuous. It was suffocating. It was humiliating. And if you're honest, maybe at some point you've wondered, God, isn't this a little much? I mean, why not a Jewish death? Why not prophesy? Why didn't God prophesy from the very beginning that Jesus would die the death of 100 stones, and then we would let Jewish people stone him, and then when it happens, we'd all believe you? Wouldn't that still be convincing enough? Have you ever wondered that? Why did it have to be so gruesome? Why did it have to be between thieves? Why did it have to be torturous and suffocating? Did you ever wonder that? Why did it need to be this manner of death? Because it paints an awful picture for us. Because your sin and my sin is ugly. Okay, do you remember when Jesus was having a conversation with John a conversation with Nicodemus in John chapter 3? This is where the most famous Bible verse in the world is, John 3:16. And he's having this conversation with Nicodemus, who's asking him how one is supposed to be born again. And what does that mean? Nicodemus is wondering. Do you go back into your mother's womb? And of course, it's in the course of this dialogue with Nicodemus that Jesus explains to him, leading up. We all know John 3:16, but listen to what's leading up to that in John 3:13, 14, and 15. John 3:13, 14, and 15, leading up to the most famous passage in the world, probably. It says this: "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descended from heaven, the Son of Man. And as Moses," listen to this. You ever read through this and just wonder, what's he talking about here? "And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." Okay, what is he talking about there? That whoever believes in him may have eternal life. What's he talking about? What does that mean? And Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. He's making reference, again, here we go all the way back to the beginning, near the beginning, the Pentateuch, amongst the first 5 books of the Bible. He's making reference to an account in Numbers 21 here, where the people of the Lord fell under God's judgment, and that judgment manifested itself in the form of fiery serpents. I can't imagine a worse circumstance than a bunch of fiery serpents. You know how I feel about snakes, okay? But these fiery serpents, no less, were all around them, and those serpents bit them, and they began dying. And how did the Lord deliver them? Okay, how did he save the people from the fiery serpents? He told Moses to take one of those fiery serpents and set it on a pole. Have you ever seen that image on the side of an ambulance? It's in reference to this, okay? He put the fiery serpent on a pole, and he told him to raise it up. And anyone who would look upon the pole at the serpent would be healed. And so Jesus is giving Nicodemus here, when he says, just like Moses lifted up the serpent, he's giving Nicodemus a foreshadowing of the cross. Just as the serpent was lifted up, so too must the Son of Man, must I be lifted up. And anyone who looks to me will have eternal life. Now, why is Jesus comparing himself to, of all things, a serpent? Why did God use a serpent on a pole as the symbol of something life-giving, eternally life-giving? Because on the cross, when Jesus was lifted up on the cross, he's bearing the full weight of my sin and your sin. And my sin and your sin, set against the holy character of God, is ugly. It's gruesome. It's suffocating. It's ugly dead. And so on the cross, this is what Jesus was doing. He was being lifted up. He was being lifted up. This is what the Apostle Paul describes for us in 2 Corinthians 5:21. This is exactly this is why it had to be something ugly and not something quick. Because for our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. It was the ultimate act of substitution. His work for your sin, his righteousness for your sin. He took our awful, awful sin, and what do we get? We get his perfect righteousness. It's the best puzzle you'll ever be a part of. And as it completes, the picture it paints is greater than any picture man could conceive of. This is why I say this is just miraculous. And I don't see how anyone can't believe this, because again, of all the pieces that effectively were floating out there that they weren't sure, what do all these things mean, as they pop into place in the New Testament, right at this crucifixion, things start popping into place. And how could any man conceive of it? Impossible. It has to be of God. It's the glorious cross. And it's why the cross is a symbol of victory. It's the cross, not a sword, not a shield or a club, not any implement of war, but it's the cross. It made no sense to the disciples in the moment, but now it stands as the symbol that God uses to give us freedom in Christ because of what Jesus did on the cross. All these pieces coming together and fulfilling everything that was required in the Old Testament, and now glorified and fulfilled in Jesus Christ in the New. It's amazing, and I can't get over it. So that's what I wanted to tell you about the crucifixion today. Let's see. Would you also say that so much, this is also from Luke, would you also say that so much of life with God is about being in covenant? Yes. With the people of God and with God. And the crucifixion was outside the covenant, outside the people. And it was even more representative of the horror of our sin outside the people of God. That's a really good point. Because yes, I want to make clear that the crucifixion was an ugly, gruesome death. Because again, our sin against the holy character of God was ugly, it was gruesome, it was awful. And so many times when I've heard well-meaning teachers talk about the crucifixion, and they talk about the manner of death. They talk about, they go into great detail about the pierced hands, the crown of thorns, and the suffocating, and those things. And again, yes, that's meant to paint a picture, but the most gruesome event of all, the most horrid piece of that of all, was when God turned his head from the sun and Jesus proclaimed, my God, why have you forsaken me? That, being separated in that moment was the most tortuous piece of all of it. Being separated, being set outside again, being set outside the camp, being separated from God. That was the worst of it. That was the absolute worst of it, the separation from God. And now, because of that separation, we can't be separated from God ever again. That it's done once and for all. Our sin for his righteousness, and now we stand in the place of with Jesus, and we reign forever with him. Amen. Wow, what a great thought. We'll move next week. If you have any other questions, go ahead and send them through, and I'd be happy to either unmute you or read your question and try and address it. But next week, what we want to try and do is examine a few pieces or elements of the resurrection itself. Here's the question I have for you. You can start thinking about this, and for those of you that have been with me long enough, probably have heard me answer this once or twice before. But okay, if it was the crucifixion that paid for our sin, if it was the crucifixion that made us right before, if that was the penalty, and even Jesus himself on the cross proclaimed what? It is finished. That's an accounting term that means, the debt has been settled. Everything is right now. Everything has been made right. Why did it end there? Or why didn't it end there? Okay, why then do we have to have the crucifixion? Is our faith complete without the crucifixion? Think about that. Okay, think about that, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about next week, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And as we've been doing in this series, asking ourselves what it is, what was said, and what was meant by what was said. So we're going to look at the crucifixion and the resurrection, and really ask ourselves, what does it mean? What does it mean, and how do we apply that to our faith? Okay, and it appears there are no other questions coming through. But once again, I appreciate your participation, all of you. And I look forward to the next time we can be together either this way or in person or whatever the case may be. I hope to see you all soon. Thank you all, and I love you. Hope you all have a great week.